The Grail period dies out in about 1230. 1180 to 1230 is the period. In comes the Inquisition, 1233. That pretty much puts an end to most of the heresies, even though actually they keep going on. It was a never-ending battle for the church. And we get Mallory's Morte d'Arthur, which was published by Caxton posthumously in 1485 as the sort of last belated straggler of this tradition. And then beyond that, Spenser's Faerie Queen in 1590 to 96, somewhere in there, as the sort of even more last belated straggler. But Spenser's Faerie Queen has a very different spirit from these romances. Spenser is basing his material on the great epics that were fashioned by the Italians during the 15th century, Boiardo and Tasso, Jerusalem Delivered, and all of this, which is based on the matter of Roland in France rather than the Arthurian materials. So he has Arthur in there as a prince, Prince Arthur, and he has all this knights and this chivalric material, but the spirit is quite alien to the original spirit of the romances. But then the next work that I want to draw your attention to is Don Quixote. Don Quixote comes out in 1605. And Don Quixote, as everyone knows, is reading these, is so full of these romances that he sets out to slay dragons, and he finds windmills. Something has happened to the world now, to the medieval European imagination. Something fundamental has changed. Why is it, we must ask ourselves, that Don Quixote sets out and discovers hard, crude reality when these other knights were setting out finding all kinds of great dragons and so forth? What has happened here? And I want to suggest that what has happened is that the Grail myth itself, starting as a myth, has concretized itself into historical reality, and the new wave of Grail questers began to set out through the period of the 15th century. Diaz rounds the Cape of Good Hope in 1487. Columbus discovers America in 1492. In 1497, Vasco da Gama makes it to India, and in 1523, Magellan has circumnavigated the globe. And this called for a complete throwing out of all the maps of the medieval world. So the whole earth underneath everyone's feet has simply shattered and dropped out by the myth of the Grail quest itself. Recall that the famous line that Campbell always quotes from the Cistercian monk, La Casta del San Graal, each went off into the forest at the point where it was darkest and where there was no way or path. They went alone. That's what these men actually did. They went out alone, where it was said that if you sailed past a certain point, you would fall off the edge of the earth or encounter dragons there. And these men were heedless of the popular imagination and simply went out into the dark forest of adventure, each of them alone, and discovered whole new worlds. And this completely reshaped the medieval, in fact, smashed the medieval cosmos. Then we have the new Grail questers of the mind close on their heels. 1543, Copernicus publishes his book on the heliocentric hypothesis, pulling the rug out from under everyone. Now we're spinning out in space. We're not the center of things anymore. And Vesalius, in that same year, published his text on anatomy, where he rejected Galen's notion of the human morphology being based on animal morphology. And he went out and did what you weren't allowed to do, cut up bodies and find out for yourself what was inside them. So these are new Grail questers here, doing what you're not supposed to do, doing precisely what nobody else is doing. These two are followed by Galileo, who is the first to peer through the telescope and discover that the heavens were far from perfect. There were moons, he saw, whirling around Jupiter. There were imperfections and pockmarks on the moon and on these smaller moons, and the rings of Saturn were oddly shaped, whereas it had been thought during the Middle Ages that the cosmos was the realm of absolute perfection. In fact, if you imagine it as a Greek sculpture, fixed, you'll get the idea of what they were after. A beautiful work of art that is absolute perfection. And the world of the earth is the world of time, of generation and corruption, of imperfection, whereas the world of the heavens was the world of perfection and gods and eternity. All of that fell apart then with these men. Kepler comes in and begins to suggest that the planets don't move at all in perfect circles. They move in ellipses. So perfection doesn't work anymore. Then finally Newton comes on stage, standing on the shoulders of these giants, as he was always fond of saying, and says, well, look, if the heavens aren't as perfect as everyone has thought that they have been, maybe the laws of the earth and the laws of the cosmos are the same and uniform throughout. Maybe the law that causes the apple to fall from the tree is precisely the law that causes the moon to fall perpetually around the Earth, and the planets perpetually around the sun. This is the law of universal gravitation by which the heavens and the Earth become synthesized into a single continuum. There's no room for dragons or gods anymore. They've been smashed and destroyed by all of these Grail questers. And this is precisely why Don Quixote sets out in 1605, and this is what he finds. It's a new world. The stage has been completely reshaped. But the Grail myth, though, and I want to emphasize this, is still going here. It's the same myth. It's the same myth of the Don Quixote, the individual going out and finding his personal quest. It's just that the stage has changed. We're to operate within the laws of reality now. So Don Quixote then is the point at which, in the history of Western literature, the romance and the epic are transubstantiated into the novel. Generally, scholars regard Don Quixote as the first novel, more or less. There were Greek novels, but this is really the first of this kind. And throughout the 18th century, Don Quixote will be followed by a horde of novels, where the Grail myth will be transformed into the quest for one's own destiny. And we get all of these unique characters, Tom Jones, Barry Lyndon, if anyone's seen Barry Lyndon, it's exactly the spirit of these novels. Robinson Crusoe is out alone on his island, working it out with God. You know, Faust is questing for the infinite, the ultimate experience. We also have Hamlet lost in the dark Gothic interiors of his own ego, and he can't get out. We have Wotan's battle with fate at Wagner's Ring Cycle. Spengler has made the point in The Decline of the West that the heroes of Northern European literature are the loneliest heroes in the history of literature. And this is why, because we remember that line from the Casta, where they went out alone into the forest. But now the Grail myth has been transformed into the biographical portrait, whereby one's character is earned through the process of maturation. And then this brings us then to the 19th century, where the Grail myths reappear. Why do they reappear in the works of Wagner and Tennyson and the Romantics generally? Well, we should pause for a second to regard, furthermore, what this new mechanical transformation of the universe has led to. The steam engine is invented in 1698 by Savory as a kind of pump for drawing water out of mines. Then the piston is put in by Thomas Newcomen in the 18th century, and then Watt refurbishes the whole thing to get the ultimate sort of steam engine. And by the 19th century, the steam engine is the primary machine powering things, along with the dynamo, the electrical dynamo, which Henry Adams regarded in his work as equivalent to the 19th century what the Virgin Mary was to the 12th century, namely the central driving force of mystery that is powering everyone. The internal combustion engine is also invented in the 19th century, and this makes possible the personal horse. The horse is traded in for horsepower, and this leads to the automobile. But the danger was that in comes the factories and the Industrial Revolution, and this presented a danger to the Grail myth, namely that your life could be dictated to you by the machine. The machines were stripping nature of the divine, stripping nature of any sense of purpose, meaning, or values, and even the living of human life in service to these machines strips you of your own life. And you can find yourself in a wasteland position, punching the clock at the factory, working 14 hours a day and wondering why the hell you're doing it. You know, that's a wasteland. So in response to this new wasteland that the factories were creating in the 19th century, the Romantics rebelled against this. There are a number of waves of Romanticism. There are the British Romantics and the German Romantics. The French never really got the sense of Romanticism except in a few cases. And so they began going back to the Middle Ages and resurrecting this material to try to regain some sense of integrity for the individual. Although they changed the stories quite a bit. Wagner's Parsifal, as I mentioned earlier, is based on Wolfram's text, but he's completely changed the spirit into this pretentious, sanctimonious, extremely Christian interpretation, where Parsifal becomes a virgin